Jesus told us to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son and Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey my commands. For I am with you always. Our primary goals are to evangelize nations of the earth, disciple new believers, plant churches, and continuously share the benefits of the gospel, our passion, transforming lives, have working relationships, growing teams, expanding strategies, advancing church. Do you want to be a part? It's a mission that is possible.
What would Jesus do? Through the next few weeks, we'll be looking at confidence, diligence, trust, neglect. How do parents cope? Grandparents cope? How do we use social media? The children, the cell phones, the determination of many countries of pedophiles wanted to be their craft to be legalized. Can you remember? What is the church's biblical and moral responsibilities? What are the fiduciary duties of the church? What are something a duty of care, duty of loyalty? How is the church susceptible? How do we protect our children at such a time as this? All these questions and more will be answered. This week would be a very deep week, as Senator Burgess, now positioned in a very unique way, speaks on a team, speaks on, as she, the issues of incidents. What are the issues? How do we deal with it? And I was looking at some of the issues that they'll be dealing with. It's like, what is the situation in the 21st century? You have read it all. Now the sports. What is it? The implications. What are the implications? What is the impact? Cyberbullying. What we do know is that throughout our Caribbean countries, as never before in history, have we seen this mass attack, demonic attack on our children in our churches. The child protection agencies in Trinidad and Tobago, and I show in all the countries, they are overwhelmed because some of them have been even infiltrated, although they are very alert. And tonight, as we do this launch, we want to present, as we hear Dr. Burgess speak, on the topic tonight on how can a church effectively evangelize a hurting generation. How can this hurting generation be evangelized? And I pray tonight that this message that has been predicted at the Billion Souls Conference, she was fact, Dr. Burgess, now Senator Burgess, speaks at the Billion Souls Conference. Let's listen to her as she speaks to launch out this session.
So our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Margaret Burgess. She's an attorney at law and has been involved in Christian ministry in Trinidad and Tobago and the Wesleyan Holiness Church for over 45 years. And Margaret has served in various capacities here in the District Board of Administration, District Board of Ministerial Standing, Sunday School Youth Ministry, and we are delighted to have her here, and her specialty is that she's going to be talking to us about child protection. Would you help me welcome Margaret Burgess as she comes to speak?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ishak. We want to thank God for the opportunity that we have this afternoon. And firstly, I want to recognize the visionary and co-founder of the Billion Soul Network, Dr. James O. Davis. We want to thank him for this conference. Let's give him a round of applause. And for choosing Trinidad and Tobago as a hub. I am really excited about this vision and about this plan that he has been speaking to us about thus far. I also want to thank Brother Dr. Austin, Pastor Austin, for, and this fantastic organization of this conference. Clearly a lot of work went into it and good organization, and we want to thank all of you. I also want to recognize my husband, Reverend Dr. Kenrick Burgess, and my daughter, Dr. Peggy Ann Burgess, who are here with me today to give me their support, along with other members of our Assembly, Global Partners Caribbean Mission Network, Brother O'Shea Antoine and Sister Valerie Endeavor. I want to thank all of you for your support. At this time, I just want to quickly talk about my book, Protecting Our Children, Law, Policy and Procedures for Child Protection in the Caribbean. And in this book, I've examined the law of 14 Caribbean countries, ranging from Antigua, Barbados, coming right down to Trinidad and Tobago. And what we've done is that we've looked at the child protection laws that all of these different jurisdictions have, and we included even some of the countries from South America. We have Guyana, and we also included Central American countries as Belize and Cayman Islands. We've looked at the laws and designed a child protection policy for protection of children for organizations. And we also include a section on parenting for effective child protection, as well as the role of the church and the responsibilities of the church for child protection. So this is a book that you must have. You can check us out at our book table. It's coming soon, perhaps most likely by the middle of next month. You can place your pre-orders. If you place your pre-orders today, you'd get it at a special price of $350 if you order today. After that, then you'll have to pay the full price. But we want you to make sure that you get this book, because it is a response to the situation that we have in our country and globally. And then we've also formed a network foundation, Global Child Protection Foundation, which provides training workshops for implementation of the policy, as well as parenting workshops and also safety training for children, because the children need to know how to keep themselves safe, because this is a situation that is really, really very serious. This afternoon, I am speaking to you on the topic, protecting our children. How can the church effectively evangelize a hurting generation? And our text is taken from Matthew chapter 18, verse 6 to 7, where Jesus said, and Jesus was very passionate about the children, and he said, if Whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and that he were drowned in the depths of the sea. And in verse 7, he said, woe unto the world because of the offenses, for it must needs be that offenses will come. But woe unto that man by whom the offense cometh. Thank you very much. And then he went on in verses 18, chapter 18, verses 15 to 17 to say, moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between him and thee alone. So we are going to be looking at those passages this afternoon. But the question that we are looking at, how can we effectively evangelize a hurting generation? Today, most of all, I give honor unto God, our Father, who has put his plan of salvation in place. And this is a plan that we've been talking about, sharing it with the world so that they too can be saved in the name of Jesus. Now, I'll be considering three areas: the incidence of child maltreatment, and we take a quick global snapshot, the impact of child maltreatment on the child, and the implications for the church. Child maltreatment is a global public health problem. And when I speak of child maltreatment, I'm speaking about all of the forms of abuse, because child maltreatment includes physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. And millions of children around the world are affected by this scourge every year. If you look at it in 2013, the statistics for the United States was that there were 679,000 children who were victims of maltreatment. In the UK, 2013, 18,915 sexual crimes against children under 16. And over 90% of these children were abused by someone known to them. By the next year, 2013 to 2014, this doubled to 36,429 sexual crimes. In Europe, child sexual abuse, 18 million, physical abuse, 44 million, emotional abuse, 55 million children were affected. In South Africa, the statistics, International Business Times states that a child is raped every 3 minutes. In 2000, over 67,000 cases of rape and sexual assaults against children. And some of these victims were as young as 6 months. Many died of their injuries and HIV. In the Caribbean, the incidence of child abuse is also alarming. 2005 to 2006, the UNICEF carried out a regional assessment in 16 Caribbean countries, from Jamaica, Haiti, Suriname, Ghana, Trinidad and Tobago, and other Caribbean countries. And the study revealed that child abuse and neglect is rampant in the region. It takes place across all ethnic, socioeconomic, and religious groups, and significant numbers of children are affected. 2008 to 2009, another study was conducted, and it stated that the child sexual abuse is escalating. It has increasingly severe consequences for Caribbean societies. It is perpetuated not only by adults who sexually abuse children, but also by non-abusing adults through complicity, through silence, through denial, and the failure to take appropriate action. That was a UNICEF report. There is considerable underreporting in the Caribbean. Some reasons for underreporting of the child abuse are fear of retaliation, a culture of shame, and maintaining privacy in the family. That don't happen in this family, or that is our family business, or that don't happen in this church, that is this church business. The view that abuse is a private matter, the dependence on the perpetrator for financial support. So where there is that support, mothers tend to turn a blind eye because she does not want to lose that financial support. There is a tendency to protect the perpetrator, who is usually a family, a friend of the family, some other person well known to the victim. And there are also ineffective reporting protocols in some cases. All of these are reasons for the underreporting. A World Bank study in 2003 revealed that the Caribbean has the earliest age of sexual initiation in the world. Many young people are initiated into sexual behavior as a consequence of child sexual abuse as early as 10 years and younger. In Trinidad and Tobago, we've had 5 years and 13 months. We've had reports of a child being sexually assaulted at 13 months by the child's mother's boyfriend. And just to share a little of the statistics for some of the countries, child sexual abuse, I'll start with Guyana because I look at the countries represented here today. In Guyana, there's significant underreporting as everywhere else. A duty to report was enacted in 2009, and this resulted in an increase in the number of reports, so that in 2011 there were 715 reports of sexual abuse. 2012, that increased to 4,100 reports on all forms of abuse. All of the 4 forms. In Jamaica, May 2012, UNICEF News reported 9-year-old boy systematically raped by his pastor while his mother was at work. 18-month-old baby boy who died of internal damage after being raped by his uncle. A little girl infected with gonorrhea, syphilis, herpes, and HIV by an uncle who was in and out of prison. Some men even believe that they have the right to engage in the United States that advises churches. They released a study that showed that although the Catholic Church was getting all the attention for child sexual abuse, the problem was even greater in Protestant churches. 70 allegations of sexual abuse a week. Now, what is the impact of all of this abuse on the child? There's a neurological impact. There's now scientific evidence done by Harvard School of Studies that child maltreatment in the early years affects the development of the brain of the child and often reduces the size of the brain, of various parts of the brain. So that if a child experiences extreme adversity or maltreatment, or from caregivers or from parents, it affects the child's normal brain development. Then there are changes in the brain structure and chemical activity that have a wide variety of effects on children. All of a sudden, we are hearing of this problem of ADHD. You've heard about ADHD, children who are hyperactive, who cannot keep quiet, who cannot settle down. That's a result of abuse. Then there's the issue of disassociation and daydreaming, which is a child's way of disengaging from the situation. So they cannot concentrate on their work, hence the reason it affects performance in school and so on. The negative impact of child abuse on the victim continues into adulthood. So that it has been found that there's the inability to have happy and healthy relationships with family members, members of the opposite sex. Often the experience traumatizes the child to such an extent that they cannot speak about it until they are well into adulthood, 40 years, 50 years and more. And that's the first time that they're able to come out and speak. Many victims suffer from denial and convince themselves that the incident never happened, or they repress the memory to near totality. Some tend to be attracted to persons who are abusers and find themselves in relationships that are abusive, or some become abusers themselves. Hurting people hurt people. The reality is that the incident just does not go away from the mind of a child. Even though a child may appear to be normal, that's not so. It does not really go away from the mind. Child abuse, particularly child sexual abuse, is traumatic. Its effect stays for a lifetime and affects the way that children develop relationally, mentally, and emotionally. The reason is that child maltreatment sows a seed in the spirit of a child that wounds that spirit, resulting in severe damage to the entire being. And the next slide, we see what happens there. Everything is destroyed. The soul of the child is destroyed. Spiritual, physical, intellectual, and you have the range, you can see it there. And look at what flows out of it. Rejection, low self-esteem, blame, shame, depression, suicidal tendencies. You wonder why this child is always running away from home, from school. It is because that's a sign that this child is experiencing some kind of abuse. All right, there's mistrust, and some of them eventually commit suicide. It is hardly likely that a child will commit suicide because they failed the C exam. If a child commits suicide there, most likely there has been some sort of abuse and it needs to be investigated. If you look at the next slide, the seed at the bottom has germinated, because those seeds that are sown in the spirit of the child will germinate just as how seeds in nature germinate. They send out roots of bitterness and mistrust, anger, bitterness, stubbornness, depression. If you look at the top of the tree, look at what is coming out there. All the different ills of society are flowing out of that seed. All of the ills of the society are flowing out. So that coming out of abuse, you have anger, bitterness, stubbornness, depression, mistrust, low self-esteem, inner rage, juvenile delinquency, crime, suicide. Child abuse is the root cause of crime, destruction of families, and ultimately society. And yesterday, Dr. Smith was saying that something went wrong because of all the murder. That is what went wrong. It is a reflection of the amount of abuse that is happening in the societies. All of the crime. Now Trinidad and Tobago and a lot of our Caribbean countries, as we heard yesterday, is collapsing under the weight of murder, under the weight of crime, under the weight. Soon we wouldn't have enough young men around because they're all being killed and shot and so on. That is flowing out, and it is a reflection of the amount of abuse that we have in our society today. And the issue is that we have to answer now the question, what are the implications for us as a church in ministry? What are the implications for evangelism of these children? Because research has shown that many times when they are abused, the survivors' thinking and mental situation is frozen in time. They are stuck. They see everything through the grid of abuse. So you have a child who was abused by a father who said, I love you. And you are telling them that God, our Father, loves you. So they are interpreting it through the grid of abuse. Hence the reason why it has been found that many times while they are able to give mental assent to the word and to the truth, they often have difficulty believing and receiving the word of God, the word of love, because everything is being interpreted through that grid of abuse. So that the issue is, we as a church have to understand that. And we have to understand why it is we are not getting the kind of response from our young people that we should have, because of the issue and the experiences that they're having. Now, what are our implications for the church? First of all, the church has to recognize that it has certain legal responsibilities. And there are a lot of legal responsibilities. The church owes a duty of care under the law of tort. And when we talk about the law of tort, we are talking about damage and hurt and injury done by one person to another person. And we have a duty of care to ensure that our sanctuaries are safe. The church has a duty to provide a safe sanctuary. A duty of care may be defined as a legal obligation to refrain from conduct which would cause reasonably foreseeable harm or injury to another person. It is therefore necessary for the church to screen, to select, to train employees and volunteers. And we are very susceptible because of the fact that we are always scrambling to find volunteers. We always need volunteers. And so in our church situations, we have been very relaxed and very casual. From the time somebody comes, they start to come to church for a little while. Very soon they become brothers so-and-so or sisters so. They make a profession. They say they give their life to the Lord. They haven't really been counseled to deal with their deep issues, and soon they find themselves working in ministry. We don't know what the background of these people are. And in fact, research in the United States has shown that 93% of convicted sex offenders describe themselves as religious. And some of them even have admitted to their counselors that church people are easy to fool. We have to be aware of that. So that many, because of the church environment, some of them can operate undercover as Sunday school teachers, as youth workers, and so on, and that is how our children get exposed. The church can be held to be liable for that, because we have a duty to provide a safe sanctuary. Hence the reason why we need a child protection policy in our churches. God has been good to us in the past that we have not been sued, because things happen in our churches, and you always hear stories about abuse and children being abused by church leaders, sometimes by pastors, by different people. Yes, but in our environment, people are becoming more aware of their legal rights, and whereas in the past we haven't really been suing churches much, more and more lawsuits are being made, and we have to be aware of that. Now, church leaders also have a legal duty to report child abuse. And in our jurisdiction, the duty is to report child sexual abuse. Section 31 of the Sexual Offences Act of Trinidad and Tobago mandates parents, guardians, and anyone who has custody of a child or temporary custody of a child for a special purpose to report any suspicion of child sexual abuse. And when we talk about temporary custody of a child for a special purpose, we are talking about Sunday school. We are talking about homework classes. We are talking about nursery school. We are talking about camp. We have temporary custody of these children for a special purpose. So if a child reports to a Sunday school teacher that is being abused, or if it is discovered that any child under your care and anyone who has custody of a child or temporary custody of a child for a special purpose to report any suspicion of child sexual abuse. And when we talk about temporary custody of a child for a special purpose, we are talking about Sunday school. We are talking about homework classes. We are talking about nursery school. We are talking about camp. We have temporary custody of these children for a special purpose. So if a child reports to a Sunday school teacher that she's being abused, or if it is discovered that any child under your care is being abused, you have a legal duty to report. And you had better report, because there are consequences for not reporting. $15,000 or 7 years imprisonment or both. Yes, so we have a duty to report. In cases of pastoral counseling, because we like to say that it's confidential, well, I have news for you. Anything concerning child abuse is an exception to the confidentiality rule in counseling. So you cannot get away by saying that it was confidential. Child sexual abuse is a criminal offense. It is a criminal offense, and therefore it means that it is an all criminal offenses are offenses against the state, and they must be handled by the state. The next thing is that only a reasonable suspicion is required to make a report. Sometimes we tend to feel that we have to have evidence, and sometimes in church we tend to feel that we have to investigate first to see if it is true and to see whatever. When the church gets involved in doing that, what we are doing is tainting the evidence. and causing the evidence to be lost. There is no requirement under the law for you to investigate a matter first before it is reported. The first thing that you are required to do is to report. And you leave the investigation up to people, the investigators, and the state authorities who are trained to carry out investigations and find out more in the matter. It may or may not be true. The report that the child makes may or may not be true. But you know what? The research has shown that only in 1.5% of the time a child may be lying about abuse. It means that in the 98%, right? Over 98% of the times the child is correct. So you have a duty to report. Those are your legal duties. You also have biblical duties. The first biblical duty is to take decisive action against the perpetrator. We must follow the scriptural injunction given by Jesus Christ to provide a safe, nurturing environment for our children. In 1 Samuel 2, we read the account of Eli. Eli's sons were abusing the young woman who came to the church. Eli knew about it. He spoke to his sons about it. He grieved, but what? He did nothing. Likewise in the church today, we are hearing about it. We are grieving, but doing nothing. Grieving is not enough. Eli failed to take decisive action, and you know what? God dealt with him firmly. He failed to correct the problem. God was not pleased. He punished the house of Eli, and they all died in one day. God judged them. In our text today, Jesus strongly denounced any sin that would offend a child, any sin that would be a stumbling block in the life of a child, anything that would cause them to sin. He said that the person, in fact, that treatment that Jesus prescribed was capital punishment, because at the time, hanging a millstone around the neck of a person was capital punishment that was practiced by the Syrians and the Romans and the nations in those days. And it was seen to be so serious by Jesus that he said capital punishment should be applied. Even in society today, society finds it repulsive, because whenever persons are charged for pedophilia or any kind of child sexual abuse and they're taken to court, you see the reaction in the community? People usually gather there, and if they get hold of them, they would kill them. Even in the prisons, it's repulsive to prisoners, because the persons who are put in prison, who are charged and put in prison, have to be protected. Just last month, we had a case of these two children who were found naked in a pickup along with a perpetrator. He had them drugged, and he had already started to sexually abuse them. And when he was sent to prison, they had to put him in a separate section, because those prisoners would have dealt with him. So the society finds it repulsive, yet often in the church we don't. Often in the church we turn a blind eye to instances of child sexual abuse that occur in the congregation, and we fail to take decisive action. Grieving is not enough. We must take decisive action against the perpetrators, regardless of who he is, because that is the problem. Then the church has to adopt the right approach. Sometimes we use the wrong approach. We use the Matthew 15 to 17 approach, where Jesus talks about confronting one another, but that relates to personal offenses. Confronting, putting the victim to confront the perpetrator is not the right approach to use, right? The right approach is to report it. Report. Then the next thing is that the church needs to receive the victim's report. Many times, reports of victims are met with castigation, are met with denial, are met with casual dismissal, or even stern rebuke. So that, as I said before, sometimes even in the church, we tend to have more sympathy for the perpetrator and the pedophile who is in the church than for the child. The thing is, once no action is taken against the perpetrator, they continue their activities. And they would go from that child to another one because they know that nobody is going to report. A lot of times children are afraid to report because they feel or they know that they would not be believed. And therefore the perpetrator, that's just what they want. They continue to do their activities. Many times children, we have young people come into the church. Then next thing they disappear. And we don't know why they disappear. And sometimes it is because of that. Because they may have been affected, they may have been violated by somebody from the church. They're afraid to talk about it, and so they just disappear from the church and we lose them. If we are to be effective in reaching out to the hurting souls in the generation, we have to have a receptive ear to our young people. We have to hear where they are hurting. No longer must sympathy for the perpetrator be greater than the empathy for the victim. No longer must the word of God be used to silence victims in order to protect the image of the organization. And sometimes we do that. We say, no, you can't talk anything about that. You will make the church look bad. God doesn't need us to protect his name. And in fact, God would not want us to cover up sin. Yes? No longer must victims and their families be admonished that it is not right to judge somebody wrongfully when they come and they talk about it. No longer must God's name and honor and God's word be used as weapons to silence victims of abuse. God is not interested in protecting structure and form, regardless of substance. The work and ministry of God does not require protection through stepping on the necks of victims and rendering them mute. We have got to break the silence and take action. So the church has a biblical responsibility. Also in Romans 13:1, Paul told us that the powers that be are ordained of God. As a church, we are mandated to obey the law of the land. We cannot take it upon ourselves to decide to handle the matter quietly behind closed doors when the law requires us to make a report. We will stand the consequences for that. Also, because of we need to respond appropriately to the survivors of abuse. Many times we do not provide the kind of support for persons who are survivors of the abuse. And that is one of the areas where we as a church, if we are going to be effective in our evangelism, we have got to have more and more counseling clinics. Right now, we don't have enough counseling clinics. Right now, we don't have enough biblical counselors to deal with the issues and the extent of abuse that we have in our society. And that is one of the areas that we have to look at as a church. If we want our evangelism to be effective, we have to send more people to train in biblical counseling. Every church should have a counseling clinic. Every church should have a family counseling clinic to provide counseling for these victims. The church also has to invest in our children and our young people to provide facilities for their protection. We've got to place greater emphasis on healing and deliverance of our young people. We've got to place greater emphasis on spending time listening to their problems and getting into the community and helping. The church has a social responsibility. We cannot afford to sit idly by while Rome burns. Our societies are collapsing under the weight of abuse. What are we doing as a church? It is not enough for us to say we don't know. It is not enough for us to pretend that we don't know. We've got to get ourselves educated, and we've got to get in there and take action in our communities. The reason why our communities are the way they are is because of the level of abuse. In Matthew 28:19, Jesus gave the church the mandate to go into all the world and preach the gospel, and that's what this conference is about. But if we are going into the world and our gospel is to be effective, we've got to take action. For too long, the evangelical church, and I'm talking about generally, has not had a strong enough social ministry. I know that certain individual churches have certain amounts of social ministry, but the issue is that we've got a social responsibility to lobby the government. There are some cases where we need to lobby. We need to lobby the government for child protection policies in all of our schools, in all of our churches, in all of our institutions with children. Right now, I was speaking to someone this week, and she told me that she was looking for early childhood ECC nursery to send her grandchild to. And she said she cried when she saw the kinds of conditions under which ECCs and nurseries were being set up. Nothing in place, no regulation. Right now, our nurseries and ECC schools are largely unregulated. They're held all over the place, and the persons who are running them have no clue. That baby that died sometime in South, they didn't know that they didn't put the child to sleep in the right way that it should be done, because they are not trained. The role of the church is to get in there, lobby the government to bring legislation and to pass legislation to ensure that there are policies in place to protect our children. So we need to do that. We need to set up counseling, parenting workshops in our churches and in our communities. Then another thing is the churches need to have, care centers, after school care, because one of the things the Children Authority found is that a lot of times child abuse occurs and it increases in the vacation period when the children are unsupervised, or after school when they are unsupervised. So churches can set up care centers with carefully trained people, with policies well regulated to help in the community with the issue. Then we also need to provide alternative centers for these children. When the matters are in court and the person is convicted, they remove the children from the home. There is nowhere to put them. And in fact, they are being placed in homes, alternative homes, where they are also being abused there. As a church, we can play a role there. We can help to provide alternative homes for these children. Also, we can train families to adopt some of these children. That is an area of ministry. That is a means of evangelizing as well. Meeting these children as families, helping to reach out to them as well. So that all of these are some of the ways that we as a church can help to facilitate the evangelization of our young people and as our society. I pray that the Lord will help us as a church to wake up and recognize what we need to do and help us to get in there. We need to get off the fence. We need to speak out. Everybody else is speaking out. There was the issue of child marriage that was a big issue in the society recently, and everybody was talking. Did we talk? Did we make a statement as a church on that? But anyway, that's another issue. But today I want to encourage us all to get up, get involved. These are the children that Jesus died for, and Jesus is passionate. If we are going to win them, if we are going to evangelize them effectively, we have got to take decisive action, get in as a church, and make a difference. May God bless you.
Left, right, left, say we moving on together. Take we instructions from the Savior. Yeah, we taking the gospel around the world, Left, right, left, we moving left, right, round the world. Left, right, left, we marching left, right, taking it round the world. Taking the gospel round and around the world, round and around the world. Left, right,